So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good afternoon to our speaker, Mr. Harith Kamarul, the management of INCEIF brothers and sisters. My name is Fatin Shafiqah, one of the Student Representative Council at INCEIF, and I'd like to welcome all to our Digital Skills for Future series, Blockchain 101. Before I pass the mic to our speaker today, a little bit on his profile. Mr. Harith Kamarul works on community and education at Etherscan, the leading Ethereum block explorer, and is the organizer of PTHKL Meetup Group. Previously, he led data analytics and launched a 5 million USD token sale at Hello Gold. His prior experience includes Great Eastern Life and BFM 89.9. Sir Harith graduated magna cum laude with a Bachelor of Science in Natural Science from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. So without further ado, over to you, Mr. Harith.
Thank you, Fatin. Again, Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. So we're going to do a Blockchain 101 talk. Before we start, just to kind of give some heads up, because we're doing it over Zoom instead of in person, usually I take in any questions at any point, but here I will try to stop at various parts and then I'll see questions just so that it's easier to sort of for me to answer each question. There is a chat box, I think, so you could put your questions there. Otherwise, you can raise your hand when I'm pausing, and then you can ask your question there. So without further ado, so the title of today's talk is Blockchain 101, Into a Rabbit Hole of Money, Decentralization, and Smart Contracts. So let me see, I'm trying to see if I can get everyone here. Can I get a show of hands? There's a raise hand icon on Zoom. How many of you actually have a crypto portfolio already? Whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, any other cryptocurrency? Just to see how many people actually have started down this rabbit hole. Okay, so I see a couple, not that much. All right, cool. So I'll try and make sure it's very, very much layman friendly. So even if you don't know anything, never even touched an exchange, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Why it's I mentioned into a rabbit hole is because if you've ever seen or read Alice in Wonderland, you know that Alice falls down this rabbit hole into this crazy world full of magical things that don't make sense. And that is actually the experience that a lot of people have had when they've started going down into this crypto and blockchain world. Like you will end up staying up till 2 a.m. in the morning, reading some blog post or watching some YouTube video on your phone or on your computer. And if that happens to you, don't feel too awkward because it's happened to a lot of us. I like to joke that you can easily tell if someone's been like heavily in the crypto space by seeing if they have bags under their eyes, because that indicates that they've been in front of their phones or computers for too long. Yeah, so Fatin already gave you a background for me earlier. So just a quick recap, I work at Etherscan, which is a Malaysian company. We're the leading block explorer for the Ethereum blockchain, which I'll explain a little bit more about later. I used to work at Hello Gold, which is a fintech company, and that did a bunch of things related to the blockchain. And I also run Ethereum Malaysia, which is a meetup group that focuses on the technology and use cases of blockchains, not so much on the making money or trading part. We meet once a month. Right now, because of MCO, it's done via Zoom. We actually have our next one on the next Thursday, the 4th of March. So if you're interested, you can sign up and join it. I'll share the link later. An overview of what we'll be covering. Before we even talk about what blockchain is, we cover some preamble, some common words or misused words that people have, basic ideas around money and decentralization, some common features of blockchain 1.0, and then features of blockchain 2.0 and use cases, and then some local companies and communities, and finally, so what? Why would any of this matter to you? So yes, so first of all, the preamble. The first thing I need to highlight is that there are these words that people use, and they sometimes confuse these words with each other. So it's always good to untangle these confusing words so we know what we're talking about with each phrase or word that we use. So first of all is the difference between Bitcoin and blockchain. So Bitcoin is a subset of the blockchain, and the blockchain itself is a subset of what's called distributed ledger technology. So an analogy I like to use is that there is transportation, which can cover any kind of vehicle or method. And then one subset of transportation is the car or the automobile. And then one subset of a car is a Toyota. So you can think of Bitcoin as if it's a Toyota, as it's a one brand or one type of blockchain. And blockchain itself is one type of a distributed ledger technology. Another term that people commonly kind of mix up is cryptocurrency. And the word cryptocurrency itself is actually a bit already not accurate because it's a subset of a larger thing called a crypto asset. So a crypto asset is just an asset that is cryptographically backed or backed by the security of cryptography. And there are different types of these assets. So there are the crypto tokens, which you can think of as, let's say if you had a school sports day or maybe like a few years ago or a couple decades ago, if you had a school sports day, you'd have to like exchange your ringgit for these coupons or vouchers. And these coupons are what you use to buy some food or play some game at the sports day stalls. Alternatively, you can think of, let's say, if you were to go to some place like a Genting casino, when you go in and put your cash, you get like a chip that you can use to play the various games there. So a token allows you to access a certain function or certain utility of a platform. A crypto security is just a representation of a real world security, whether it is something like gold or stocks or bonds. It is represented in a cryptographic form, in the form of a crypto asset. And lastly is the cryptocurrency itself. So cryptocurrency is just any crypto asset that is used as a currency. And it's not the only type of asset there is. Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, but a lot of other things are not necessarily cryptocurrencies themselves. Another confusion that people get is that the word Bitcoin itself is used in two different ways. So generally, the capital B Bitcoin refers to the platform or the network. So you can think of it as the car that I mentioned earlier. It's what you need to be transported from one place to another. Whereas the small b Bitcoin is the currency, the unit that powers that technology. So in this analogy, you need fuel to be able to drive your car, because without fuel, you won't be able to go anywhere. And for Malaysians, maybe you can think of it as the capital B Bitcoin is like the financial system of Malaysia, and the small b Bitcoin is like the ringgit that we use to transact with each other. It's also unfortunate that a lot of people kind of sometimes use small b Bitcoin when they mean the platform, and sometimes they use the big B Bitcoin when they mean the currency. So if you understand that these two different terms exist, then from the context of the conversation or a sentence, you can figure out what someone is meaning when they say Bitcoin. Next is about what money is. And for those of you who went to university or took economics classes, you already would have known these things called store of value, unit of account, medium of exchange. So I'm not going to delve too much into this. You can go on Wikipedia to just revise on this later. But generally, a store of value is just something that the value can be sort of held over time. It's not going to disappear after a few years or a few months. A unit of account is just the kind of number that you use. So when we transact with each other in Malaysia, we use the ringgit, whereas someone in the US would use something like the US dollar. So it's easy for us to think of, like, what a nasi lemak is worth, or a 1 liter of petrol is worth, by having this shared unit of account. A medium of exchange is what we actually exchange between different hands to be able to buy a product or a service. But more importantly for me is that what money is that it has to be something that has a limited supply, or in other words, is scarce. And a bigger one is that money is just a representation of value. Money isn't the real physical item that we hold. It's just this shared belief, this story that we tell each other within a common society. So to paraphrase Lord Varys from the Game of Thrones, value resides where men believe it resides. It doesn't actually exist in the real physical world, much like the most important things in life, whether it be religion or love or politics. There is no physical thing that represents these items. It's just something that we have as a belief between each other within members of a society. And you might reply to me at this point and just ask about how, what about this paper notes of US dollar, or the ringgit, or the gold bars that we actually like exchange with each other? Are these not itself money? These, as I mentioned earlier, is just a representation. So money is just a representation of that value between each other. And now that we're a lot more used to using e-wallets, we can already see that this money is just pixels on a screen. It's just numbers. There's no real item that is backing them. And if you look at other societies, that's not as common. If anyone has ever had the unfortunate experience of going to prison, you'd know that in prison, cigarettes are commonly used as money to transact with each other, to buy things or get some services from your fellow cellmate. If you were kids, maybe 20 years ago, around when I was a kid at least, we would use trading cards to transact with each other to buy someone's, let's say, toy or lollipop. And in many cultures around the world, for hundreds or thousands of years ago, would use things like seashells as their form of money. And if you ask anyone today whether these things are money, generally people will just say, no, these are no, they're not money at all. But the point of it is that within their own local community, at that time, at that circumstance, that is what they are using as money to transact with each other. And to give more real-world examples, this is the Bolivar, the currency of Venezuela. So Venezuela, for those of you who don't know, have had inflation or hyperinflation in the millions of percents for the last few years. So much so that the citizens of Venezuela would rather use this paper notes of Bolivar as origami handbags, or to draw cartoons on top of. And by doing these things, they actually get more value than using it as a way to pay each other. Because the bag they can actually use to carry things around, and the drawings, they can actually enjoy the creativity of the art. To go back home, even in Malaysia, we have an example of how money isn't the real physical item. For those of you who have grandmothers or great-grandmothers who were around when the Japanese military was occupying Malaya, they would be able to tell you about this thing called the duit pisang, or banana money. Duit pisang comes from this, the word comes from there being pictures of bananas drawn on the Japanese government $10. And how it worked was that while the Japanese military was occupying Malaya, the only form of money anyone could use to accept as exchange is this duit pisang. You can't use the, say, British currency or any other forms of currency. You can only use this thing here. Now imagine if you were a someone who lived at that time. Maybe you were your own banana farmer, and every day you've gone to the market, you sold some bananas, people pay you this duit pisang, and you take it back home with you to save for the future. And imagine you've saved it under your bed, you have like maybe $1,000 of this duit pisang, and then one day you wake up and you see that the Japanese military has just left Malaya. They've lost the war, they've gone back home. And while it's a good experience for everyone, we're getting sort of independence, it's not that good of a news to you, in the sense that now you have $1,000 worth of this money, but no one will be willing to accept it for any transaction, because no one in their right mind will say, why would I want to take this Japanese dollar? Because there's no more Japanese military. They've gone and left. So in the space of one night, your $1,000 worth of money that could have bought you, let's say, I don't know, 1,000 nasi lemak, suddenly, in almost the blink of an eye, you wake up and it cannot buy you anything at all. So again, the money isn't the physical item, the paper. The money is just this shared belief that we have with each other. And as long as that belief holds true, then it works. But the moment it disappears, as with the duit pisang, that utility of that money will also be gone as well. And a more modern example, especially for people who are in my generation. So this is a sort of couple charts that are based on real data in the US. So the left one shows you how the real world value of the US dollar has gone down over time. So you can see from even the 1970s to right now, it's gone down by a few multiples already. And we can see this in our own lives with inflation. You buying your nasi lemak is now worth a lot more ringgit than it was. And that's a natural thing when you're using fiat or government-backed money, because it's not backed by any physical item like a gold bar as well. It's just backed by a belief in the government or the central bank, and that when they print a new supply of this money, the value of that money gets lowered bit by bit every year. And we don't notice this difference, but if you ask, let's say, if I ask my parents how much the cost of a house was in their time, and I check myself the cost of a house now, the prices have gone up by multiples, way more than the inflation numbers that you'd see measured by some sort of consumer price index or CPI. So that's a hidden form of inflation that a lot of people don't notice. The right chart here, the chart on the right here shows official numbers of the CPI, Consumer Price Index, which tracks inflation. And you can see that since 1970, when the US government and subsequently almost all governments around the world switched their money from being backed by gold to just backed by the central bank, you can see how the inflation has gone up in sort of crazy numbers. And it's not just inflation, it's a lot of other metrics related to the economy as well. You can check the link down there, WTF happened in 1971.com, where they show official numbers from the US government of how a lot of these metrics have gone up by a lot after we moved to fiat money. And why do I mention all of these things? It's because Bitcoin itself was created as a countermeasure, as a reaction to the sort of, some would say, irresponsible printing of money by central banks around the world. So the first ever block of Bitcoin had this message attached to it, which was just quoting the headline from the Times, which is a popular newspaper in the UK, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. So it was during the peak of the last global financial crisis when this Satoshi Nakamoto, this pseudonymous name, created this thing called Bitcoin. because and you will get this from a lot of people who are in the crypto or Bitcoin space. They will tell you Bitcoin is a way to exit the system, where if you were to hold your fiat-backed money, the central bank can keep printing more money, or the big institutions can keep taking advantage of the system, get a lot of profits, and when a crisis happens, get bailed out by banks, which ultimately comes from the money of normal people like you and me. So yeah, so I'll touch a little bit more about this later, but just a bit of a background on money. The key thing is that it's not a real physical item. It's a shared belief that we have with each other. So that's money. The next thing to cover is decentralization. And decentralization sounds like a lot of this kind of like jargon kind of word that doesn't make sense, but it's actually very simple. So if you, any of you who are Muslims here or who have friends who are Muslim, you'd know that the Quran wasn't this book that fell from the sky magically out of nowhere. It was a bunch or thousands of verses that were memorized in complete sort of content and in the correct order by thousands of people within the society at that time. And it's kept on being continued to be memorized by future generations, such that today we have millions of people who memorize the Quran in the exact same content and exact same order of verses anywhere around the world. So even if back then, when there were only thousands, if I wanted to come in and I wanted to sort of hijack the Quran and say that, okay, can we just add one verse in the middle there that people won't notice? And it's just a small verse. It just says, Harith is handsome. And I will pay you if you agree to kind of consider this verse added. And if there were only 2 people that memorize the Quran, it would be a lot simpler for me to do, because I just have to find them and I'll pay them maybe a couple $1,000 to bribe, and it's very easy to coordinate. But imagine if there were 10 or 100 or 1,000 people, then it becomes exponentially harder for me to do this, because not only is the cost going to be higher and higher, but also the coordination that I would need to execute is much more difficult. I need to be able to find 1,000 people and convince them to accept my bribe, all at the same or short amount of time, so to be able to convince everyone else that this verse is actually a real part of the entire Quran. So the more people there are, the harder or exponentially harder it is to try and hijack the truth or the accepted version by the community. So decentralization just means that instead of relying on one entity or a small number of entities, we are decentralizing. We are breaking it apart to thousands or more members of the society, so that we're not relying on just one person or group. We are relying on a wider subset of the community. Another example that I like to give is of this thing called a wedding. And weddings, we like to think of as this happy event to celebrate kind of a new husband and wife. But there is also a more pragmatic reason for weddings having been sort of established within cultures or societies. And this is because, and why weddings have a lot of guests that come. Instead of having one wedding with just one imam or one priest, you have like 200 or 500 guests. It's not just to celebrate, but it's also to act as witnesses. Because let's say Harith gets into a wedding, and then 1 month later, you see Harith at a neighboring village going out with some woman that's not his wife and being all romantic. Then you can act as a witness to let everybody else know in society that Harith isn't behaving in the way that is best for society. So it's a way to have this check and balance, where if there was only one imam or priest, then the likelihood that Harith gets away with this indiscretion is higher, whereas if there are 500 people, then the likelihood gets lower. Another modern example is the Google Sheet or Google Docs. And any one of you who've used Microsoft Word versus Google Docs, you'll know the vast difference. If you've ever done any group work for college or for work, you'll know that when you're doing Microsoft Word, you have to save, send it to someone else, wait for it to sync, and then the other person can add their input. Whereas with Google Docs, you can do everything in real time and not be worried about writing over each other or having someone deleting your content. This is possible because Google has thousands of nodes around the world, thousands of servers that immediately update every time you type a single character. And by doing so, even if half of them go down, the other half are still up. So there's never this question of whether your version or someone else's version is the right one for this shared Google Doc, compared to a Microsoft Word where it's all saved in your local computer until you send it to someone else, and you can have multiple different versions. So that's decentralization. And if you understand these two things, you essentially understand Bitcoin already, because Bitcoin is just decentralized money. If you understand this, you understand Bitcoin better than probably a huge majority of other human beings, even probably a lot more than some people who buy Bitcoin already, because I know a bunch of people who buy Bitcoin without actually understanding what it is. And why does decentralized money matter? Because imagine you were a doctor in Syria a few years ago. You had a comfortable life, you were doing good work for your society, and then suddenly bombs started to rain down, and you had to run away from your home. And all your wealth you can't carry with you, because you can't carry the Syrian currency because it's not accepted anywhere. You can't carry your car or your house. You could carry gold bars, but that's very heavy and can be stolen. And so you're a refugee, you go to a new country and you start from scratch. All that wealth that you had built over time is gone. Now imagine if you had Bitcoin, you didn't have to carry any physical item, just carry your private key, which I'll explain later. And even if you are in some place halfway around the world, when you get back to a computer, you just enter back your private key and you can have access to this value that hasn't disappeared, this value that exists on the internet and cannot be deflated by any government or company or a war that happens. And that's just one example. It might be an extreme example, but there are a lot of these situations that can exist, and by themselves just explain why having a decentralized money like Bitcoin is an extremely powerful thing to have. To elaborate a little bit more about decentralized money, if you think about how finance in the current modern world works, unless you are exchanging cash in person, you always need a trusted third party in between. So for example, if I want to send money to Hisham, unless I drive over to his house and give him that piece of paper, there is no way for me to trust that I've managed to send it to him without having a third party like a bank that we both trust. Because even if I were to put it into a surat, into a snail mail that gets sent to Hisham might tell me that, hey, the letter never reached my house. Or I might tell him that, hey, I've sent it to you, even though I never did. And so you can never know for sure unless you trust someone in the middle to execute it for you. And that's what has been done by most 99.999% of transactions in the modern world, and it works 99% of the time. You have banks, you have money changers, and they do what they're expected to do. But in some cases, like in Venezuela, like when a war happens, these institutions break down and you can't rely on them anymore. Or even if when you are relying on them, you are paying them a lot of money to do this service for you. So for example, if you were a web designer in Pakistan and you had a client in the US who wanted to pay you money for building a website for them, you'd have to go through something like PayPal, who would charge you 3 or 4% of the fee of the entire transaction. So, and that's 3 or 4% that isn't saved by your client, nor is it rewarded to you for doing your work. It's just going to this bank whose job is just to be the trusted third party in between. And we can see that banks and other financial institutions have made lots and lots of money just by playing this role in transactions. Now imagine if out of the bunch of us here today, the say 40 of us, we were to create a WhatsApp group of everyone involved here. We could actually create our own form of money already. All we have to do is have like a small notebook, like a buku 555, and every time a transaction happens, we write this down on our notebook. So for example, Fatin sends me 10 units of this money. Let's call it Harith money. And every time someone wants to send, or in this case, Fatin wants to send 10, then all of us, we would check on this small notebook that we have. We check if Fatin has a balance of at least 10. If she does, then we'll approve it and we'll say, okay, we'll deduct 10 from her account, increase 10 in Harith's account, and then confirm it on the WhatsApp group. And, we can create like a chain and just say, okay, I approve. And if it's not, or Fatin doesn't have enough, doesn't have 10 units of this money, then we will reject it and say the transaction doesn't go through. So when 40 of us have approved, then the transaction is considered done. And even if there's no physical coin or paper that changes hands, according to our shared understanding of everyone's balances, we agree that Fatin has 10 units less and Harith has 10 units more. So that works, but you can quickly see it doesn't make sense to rely on this, because even with 40 people, it's going to take us forever just to execute one transaction, right? We'd have to like check WhatsApp, go to a book, write with our pen, and one transaction might take like half an hour just to be accepted by everyone. And if you scale that up to 1,000 or 1,000,000 users, it becomes exponentially difficult that, we have to spend our entire 24/7 just to approve transactions and not to be able to do anything else. But imagine if instead of relying on ourselves as human beings, we use computers or computing devices to do this fact checking for us. And it might still sound a bit crazy, but if you imagine how computers now can, stream Netflix movies or play massively multiplayer online games, updating this ledger of balances is actually a very, very simple thing for it to do compared to all this other stuff. And so you don't have to waste your time fact checking any transactions. You can just rely on computers to do it for you. And when I say computers, strictly speaking here, we're talking about open sourced code, which means that the code that is running this software, that is running this program, is published online, openly and publicly. So there is no risk, there is no concern of this code is hiding behind some wall somewhere that someone can manipulate or change. The code is always exactly the same. You open your computer and you have the same, say, 100 lines of code. I open my computer and I have the exact same 100 lines of code. And we can always sort of fact check that, see online or see our own computers to see that the code is exactly the way it's shown in public. And if anyone wants to make any adjustments, any additions to the code, then we, the individual users, need to agree to accept this new version to run this in our software for it to be run. So there's no risk of someone like, let's say, I don't know, Facebook or Amazon just quietly updating the software, because you are running the software and you can choose to update the client or not. And in this way, the system becomes trust minimized, because you're not trusting any central company or repository of code. You are just relying on yourself as someone who is running this computer, or what's called a client node in the network. So I'm going to take a brief pause here. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. I see some raised hands. Yeah, I'm just going to unmute quick, one of you. So, one Fariz, do you have a question? Okay, if not, I'm going to move on. Okay, I thought I saw another hand, but it just got lowered. So yeah, so if no questions, I'm going to move on. I hope no questions because the explanation is clear and not because I've completely lost you. I do have one comment here, whether the slides can be shared. I'll talk to INCEIF later how we can do that for you. Okay, moving on. Next is some features common to blockchain 1.0 or Bitcoin. So the first thing is what's called a block explorer. So a block explorer is what Etherscan does, the company I work for. And before I touch on that, the first thing to note is that blockchains are not anonymous. So if you've ever heard in the news, people talk about how, if you're a criminal, if you're a drug dealer, then these people use Bitcoin to transact, to do some money laundering. If you are one such criminal, I would caution you against using blockchains like Bitcoin, because they are in fact not anonymous at all. And in some ways, they are even more intrusive than the current financial system. And let me explain. So this is Etherscan, a block explorer for Ethereum, but you'd see this a similar kind of interface for Bitcoin as well. When you go to a block explorer and you enter a wallet address, you can see the entire balance of that wallet on the top left here. You can even see all of the transaction history of that wallet address, who sent money to it, who it sent money to, when, how much. And if you know these details, you can make a lot of assumptions or a lot of sort of guesses about a specific person or a specific address. The only saving grace you have is that this address, all the way at the top left here, is some randomized string of characters that you don't have the ability to create. So there is no IC number, no passport number that's tied to this address. It's all just completely random. So if you create a new address, you will also see a completely random string of characters. And so even if I know your name, let's say I know Hanif's name, I wouldn't know what his address is just by knowing his name or his IC number. But if I've ever made a transaction with Hanif, whether I've sent him Bitcoin or he's sent me Bitcoin, now I know that that address that I received from is somehow related to Hanif in some way. And if it was an exchange that's licensed like Luno, where you need to verify your identity and give your IC details, then I can very, very for sure know that that address belongs to Hanif. And that's a lot of regulators, a lot of police have been doing for the last few years. They've been piecing together all these addresses and transactions to be able to trace whenever any hacks or any crime has been done, and how the transactions have been, or how the money have been transacted. And this thing is there permanently. So even if you're a criminal and you've done it today, 20 years later, 30 years later, someone can trace all these transactions on the blockchain, which is completely public, and they can find you even if you've successfully been able to hide for the last 20 years. An analogy I like to use for the Block Explorer is, if you imagine a library, and in this library there is, you walk up to the receptionist or librarian and you ask them, I want to see the contents of this book on shelf 17B. And the librarian will never stop you from showing the contents of that book. There's no exclusive shelf or exclusive restricted area in the library. As long as the book exists within that library, the receptionist or librarian will never stop you from seeing the contents of that book. Important thing to note is that Bitcoin is its own library and Ethereum is its own library. So any blockchain is its own network, and you can't go to, let's say, the Bitcoin network to find out the details of some other blockchain, because it's a separate network from each other. So think of separate libraries next to each other. Next is what's called a blockchain wallet. And the term wallet is a bit unfortunately named because when we say wallet, we think of this thing that we carry around in our pockets. You know, we have some money inside, some credit cards or whatever, and we carry it along with us. But a blockchain wallet is more accurately described as like a safety deposit box. So if you can imagine a vault in a bank or like a safe vault somewhere where you have a key, and when you open it, you take out this cupboard and you see all the money, or let's say your grandma's necklace that you've stored inside. So this safety deposit box never goes around with you. You just carry the key, but the contents is always in that safety deposit box, not in your pocket. The only difference with this safety deposit box is that it's in the cloud, in the internet. So it's not a physical vault that exists somewhere. It's just a string of code that exists within thousands of computers around the world. Yeah, so it's very important to understand that what people generally call wallets are more accurately described as a key to a safety deposit box instead of the wallet itself. If you go back to the analogy of the library earlier, a wallet is something where if you walk up to the receptionist and you say, I want to move this book from shelf 17B to shelf 36A. I don't want to just see the contents, I want to move it around. And when this happens, the receptionist will ask you, can you prove that you are the owner of shelf 17B? If you can, by showing your private key or private key for your wallet, then the receptionist will listen to your instructions and move it around. But if you cannot prove it, then you will never be able to move the book from shelf 17B. Even if you have proven it and you've moved it now to 36A, but a couple of minutes later, you're like, oh, sorry, I meant to send it to a different shelf, not 36A. Even if that were to happen, the receptionist will say, okay, the book is now in 36A. Unless you can prove that you own 36A, I cannot move it around. So the wallet becomes your sort of key to be able to tell this librarian to move the book around within the library. So wallets are using this technology called public-private key cryptography. I won't go into the technical details, but a quick way to understand it is if you can think of the public key as your mailbox or the address to your house, where let's say you want to buy something from Lazada, you have to give them your address so that they know where to send the package. Whereas the private key is both the mailbox and the key to open your house's door. And this is very important to understand. So the private key is not just the key, it's also the address to your house. So if you ever accidentally give someone your private key, it's as if you have given them the map, a map with an X marks the spot, and the key to your house door, so that if they now have these two things, even if they don't know anything about you, they can drive over to your house, take the key and open the door, grab everything that's inside, your TV, your fridge, whatever, and move it into their own house. And there's nothing you can do to stop them when this happens. And this is very, very important to understand that in the blockchain space, you are your own security. There's no Bank Negara, there's no forget password page that can help you. If you ever lose your private key or you have it stolen, you lose access or you give someone else access to all of your wealth. And this actually creates some sort of a lot of paranoia in people, because if you can imagine, let's say you have a brother or a wife that you give your private key to, and let's say your wife or your spouse, after 5 years, you guys get divorced, then at that point they can, when you're not happy with each other, the other party can just take all of that wealth away from you, and there's nothing you can do to stop them. So yeah, it makes a lot of people a lot more paranoid. Generally, there are three types of wallets. So the first simplest one is what's called the paper wallet. This is because when you create this wallet, you will be shown your public and private key as shown down here. The idea is you should never save it in any digital format in your own computer or even take a picture, because if you've ever heard about these cases of like celebrity, like adult videos that get shared, a lot of times it's not because these celebrities are intentionally sharing these adult videos to the public. It's because they are doing it for their own private users, but then they think they've deleted it from their computers. They sent it to a repair shop, and the repair people know that you can never really delete a file from a computer. So they then recover that file and they share it outside. So the same thing can happen to your private keys. Even if you've deleted it, someone can recover that private key later, and now they have access to all of your wealth. So the idea is you should always print it on a piece of paper, very backward technology based. You laminate it and you store it in at least 2 different places that are very, very secure for you. Because if one place, let's say your house gets burned down, at least you have another backup place that has your private key. The second type of wallet is what's called a hardware wallet. So this is secure and you can carry it around with you. The paper wallet you never want to carry around, because let's say you put it in your real physical wallet and it gets stolen, then you are risking your entire wealth. But with a hardware wallet, it's a device commonly shaped like a pen drive and secured by a pin. Even if this device gets stolen from you, the thief cannot easily guess your PIN, so it will take them time to randomly guess to be able to break into your device. And when that happens, you can go back home, find this 24-seed passphrase shown in this picture. You can enter that to any wallet software, and you can get the same access to your wallet. You can then move this out to a completely new address, so that by the time the thief breaks into your device, which will take very, very long, there's nothing there for them to steal. So it combines the security as well as the convenience of being able to carry your wallet with you. A third kind, and this is in blockchain 2.0, is this thing called a Web3 or a smart wallet. That's generally either a mobile app or let's say an extension in your browser. And with these, you can do a lot of very sort of complex transactions from your computers. So I'll explain a little bit more about these complex transactions later under blockchain 2.0. Okay, so that's about wallets. Next, sorry, I see a question here from Daniel. Daniel's asking whether Luno or Binance, are they considered wallets? I actually will answer that right after this part about mining. So hold on to that. These are exchanges. Short answer is it's not wallets, but I'll explain a little bit more later. The next thing is about mining, and a lot of people talk about mining, and you might see in the news as well that people are making a lot of money. They're cheating TNB for electricity. So I'm not going to talk about how to make money from mining. You might make a lot, you might not, but I'm going to talk about the how it works and why it matters. And in my opinion, is actually the most beautiful part of the blockchain. So first is, before you can understand mining, is to understand hash functions. So a hash function is a mathematical function. There are many different types where when you enter an input, like in this case, a cat or car, and the function here is catch256. When you enter the letters CAT, you will get an output that is completely random from your eyes. Like you would never be able to guess by typing cat that you would get this very, very long string. And importantly, even if someone else entered the letters cat halfway around the world, if they use the same catch256 function, they will also get this exact same result. And then if you change one character from T to R, so from cat to car, the result will also be completely different, that you would never be able to guess from the first answer that you've only changed one character to get the second answer. And there are some common characteristics, like they all share the same number of characters and so on. But I'm not going to go too deep in the technical details. But the idea is that it's a mathematical function that you can enter an input and you will always get the same output for the same input, which is completely difficult to be able to guess. One way I like to describe it is, if you think back to your high school maths classes, if you've done like exponentials, let's say 7 to the power of 3, that's a lot easier to calculate compared to the cube root of 3, the cube root of 7, because it's just the way that the function exists. To do it one way is a lot easier than to do it the other way. Another analogy I like to give is, think of a snowflake, where all snowflakes are apparently unique and none of them are the same with each other. So a hash function allows you to, let's say, melt the snowflake and it becomes a puddle of water. But to be able to reverse that function of melting, from that puddle of water, you make it back into the unique snowflake that it was, is extremely difficult. So one side is a lot easier to do than the other side. And okay, this is maybe a little bit off topic, but I just want to cover it very quickly. In blockchains, there are these things called the Merkle Tree, which is basically just a hash of a hash. And so imagine if the top part here are all transactions, and we use colors to indicate. So each square at the top is one transaction. If you try to cheat by saying that, okay, instead of this green transaction, I'm going to change it into a pink transaction. By doing so, you will change all of the hashes for the next layer. So for example, instead of this kind of turquoise color, you'll see a purple color, and that difference travels down. So because on the second layer it's already a different color, when you go all down, you'll also see a different color. And so if you were trying to cheat me by changing one transaction, I can just very quickly look at the bottom square and see that, hey, the color somehow isn't what it's supposed to be. It's not matching this kind of grayish color. It's becoming this maroon color. So I will quickly know that you've done something bad to the block of transactions, and I will reject what you're suggesting to me. So this Merkle tree function, hashing of hashes, just allows you to be able to quickly verify whether something is correct or not without having to do the enormous work of computing the mathematical functions that's being done. So you can verify quickly, even though to execute is a lot more difficult. So I'll mention a little bit about all the hashes stuff later. But if you go back to the example I shared earlier about having this network of computers that we can use as our form of money. So even though when we're using computers, we're not taking up our time, like opening up our notebook and writing these things down. But there is still a cost to us, because when you run a computer, you have to pay your electricity bills, right? So to run the computer 24/7, you have to pay an electricity bill of, let's say, a couple hundred ringgit. And if the only people that are transacting in this network is, as mentioned earlier, Fatin and Harith, you will very quickly decide, hey, I'm paying a couple $100 a month. I'm not actually using this network. Only Harith and Fatin are like getting any value from this network. So then you will go like, okay, I'm just going to shut this down. When I make a transaction, then I'll turn it back on. And this is a horrible thing to do, because if everybody does that, and the only two computers that's on are Harith's and Fatin's, then the two computers can cheat the transactions. They can make spend more money than each of them have, or do a lot of hanky-panky stuff until and they won't get caught until all of these other people who had their computers turned off turn it back on. And by that time, they might have cheated people from a lot of value already. So to tackle this problem, Satoshi Nakamoto created this thing called mining, where there is a block of chains that get created, and every time a block gets sort of created out of thin air, along with that block comes some new Bitcoin that gets created. So the word mining comes from the idea of gold mines, where you could be like mining, like trying to break the earth, trying to find gold, until you randomly find these gold pieces, and that gets added to the supply of gold in the world. So even though mining doesn't require you to use your pickle and shovels, the idea is that by running a computer that's connected to the network, even if you're not making any transaction, so only Fatin and Harith are transacting with each other, you are still incentivized to keep your computer running, because randomly, by random chance, your computer might be the lucky one to have mined a block. And when you mine a block, you get rewarded with new Bitcoin and transaction fees that Harith and Fatin send to each other. So even if you're not transacting anything, you are now potentially earning money by keeping your computer running. So then this idea of like turning off your computer doesn't exist, because now you want to keep your computer on because you can make money. So that is a very personally for me the most beautiful part of the Bitcoin blockchain, having this game theory of incentivizing people who otherwise would have no reason to keep the computer running, but now they do because they can get the Bitcoin block reward. So I mentioned transaction fees. So generally you have to pay someone a fee when you're transacting on the blockchain. Typically people might say, hey, why do we have to pay this fee? Like in the real world, I never have to pay fee to anyone if I use Visa. But in actual fact, you actually do, but the cost is usually borne by the merchants. And it's not that merchants are doing this for free. They actually add that to the cost of whatever item that you're buying. So you actually are paying a transaction fee in the real world, even though you just don't notice it because it gets abstracted away from you. Blockchains, another cool thing with this game theory that Satoshi created is the difficulty becomes adjusted. So imagine a lot of us see that, oh, mining makes a lot of money. So I'm going to start a mine and everybody else is going to start a mine. So if there were 100 computers, you might, let's say on average, solve this puzzle in say 10 minutes. And then if there are 1,000 computers, then the chances of you solving the same puzzle would be of someone solving the puzzle will be much higher. And so it might take less than 10 minutes for this puzzle to be solved. But Satoshi did this thing where the difficulty becomes adjusted. So the more miners there are, the difficulty of the puzzle becomes higher and higher or harder and harder, such that on average, you would expect one Bitcoin block to be mined every 10 minutes. And this is specific for Bitcoin. For other blockchains, it might take a different amount of time. So for example, Ethereum takes 15 seconds and other chains take different amounts of time as well. I've skipped a little bit here. So I mentioned the hash just now, that the reverse function is much more difficult than the forward function. So mining just basically involves having a hash where you are given, let's say, the answer. Instead of given the word cat, you are giving that very long string. And now you're supposed to reverse the answer from that long string into the words cat. So the difficulty is much higher. And so all of these computers that are mining are basically just guessing answers. They're literally like if you imagine like in a movie where a bank robber is trying to like get into a vault and they enter a device that just like randomly guesses 4 digits until they find the right one. So that's all that the miners are doing. There's no like fancy stuff. They are just like trial and error guessing until they get the right answer. Yeah, so that's mining in short. This specifically refers to the consensus mechanism of proof of work. There are other consensus mechanisms out there. But yeah, that's for a more advanced topic. I think for now, we'll just focus on proof of work first. There are other ones as well. So yeah, so one final note on mining. The word blockchain itself comes from this idea of having a block of transactions where you group transactions together. Let's say 100 transactions, you group them into a block, and then that block gets mined by a computer. And when it gets mined, it gets added to a chain of other blocks. So the word blockchain comes from this idea. And if you want to hijack the content of one block that was maybe 100 blocks ago, you then have to hijack every other block that came after it. And in the case of Bitcoin, you have to do all of this within 10 minutes because after 10 minutes, a new block gets created. And so all of this hijacking effort that you tried, you now have to redo it again because all of these blocks are kind of reliant on each other. And so if you were to change the content here, you will change the content of every subsequent block as well. So that difficulty, as with the Quran example I gave earlier, becomes exponentially harder the more blocks there are that you are trying to hijack. So the next question after this, people get excited and they think about how do I buy crypto? So commonly there are 2 ways to buy. You can buy over the counter. Basically, if you know me, you know I'm looking to sell some Bitcoin, then you can find me and we can arrange with each other or negotiate with each other. But much more commonly, people will use these things called exchanges. And exchanges are just essentially marketplaces. You know, over human civilization, we figured out that having a marketplace that is like a Schelling point, that where people come together, it's much more likely if you have, let's say, a loaf of bread, that you will find someone else out there who wants to exchange your loaf of bread for a piece of chicken. Or between a few different people, a few different transactions, you can give your loaf of bread and get back a piece of chicken. It's much more likely to happen when there is a marketplace where everybody congregates together. So an exchange does something similar, but only in digital, except that it's in the digital space. There are commonly two main types of exchanges. One is fiat to crypto, and one is crypto to crypto. So fiat to crypto is like where you use your ringgit or your US dollar. Generally, these are licensed because you are using your country's fiat money. In Malaysia, there are only 3 licensed exchanges right now: Luno, Synergy, and Tokenize. There's a subset also of broker and marketplace, where a broker, you just give them the price that they quote to you, whereas a marketplace is where you can put in a maker and taker order. If you're familiar with the Bursa stock exchange, it works the same way. And then there is the crypto to crypto exchange, where because the fiat to crypto, you can typically only transact the top 5 or 10 cryptocurrencies, but you can't buy this current cryptocurrency that is this small one that nobody else has ever heard of. To do that, you have to go to this crypto exchange and use your, let's say, Bitcoin or Ethereum in exchange for that smaller currency. The key thing that I want to cover when you talk about exchanges, and to answer Daniel's question earlier, is that exchanges are not wallets. These are very different things, and in many ways, an exchange is the antithesis of what a blockchain is supposed to be about. To give an analogy, think of a money changer where you want to exchange, let's say, US dollar for ringgit, and you walk up to the money changer and you give them $25, and they're supposed to give you back 100 ringgit. But imagine a scenario where, in this case, you're like, I don't want the 100 ringgit in my wallet. I've done this exchange, but I want you to keep hold of the 100 ringgit for me. I trust you to keep it for me. And then you go back home, and then the next day, you hear the news, you find out that, oh, this money changer has actually just been robbed, or got burnt down, or the owner like disappeared and ran away with the money. In that case, even though you've exchanged your US dollar for ringgit, because you never took that ringgit into your own wallet, and you trusted the money changer, when they ran away, all your money is also now just gone. And that's what commonly, and that's what can happen with exchanges, because what you're doing is you are trusting the exchange to hold on to your crypto for you. You have, let's say, 1 Bitcoin, you're telling them, okay, I trust you to secure my Bitcoin for me. I'm not going to take that Bitcoin and put it into my own blockchain wallet. And then when the exchange gets hacked or they hack themselves, then your money is gone. And a lot of the cases that you hear in the news about how Bitcoin has been hacked, Bitcoin itself has never been hacked. No one's hacked the platform or the network of Bitcoin. What's happened is that they've hacked the wallet of that exchange for hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, because the exchange didn't take care of their private keys in a good way. So if anyone talks about how that is hacking Bitcoin, it's the same as if we're saying that the ringgit has been hacked because a money changer has been robbed. It doesn't make sense to make that statement. And the fact that you are trusting an exchange to hold on to your money for you is against the idea of blockchains, or against the idea of decentralization, because the idea is that you don't have to trust anyone. You just use your own wallet, you trust only yourself and your own best practices, instead of trusting someone else. So when these things happen, a lot of people will say, why not just use a bank? Why bother use blockchains or cryptocurrency when you can trust if you want to trust someone, you might as well trust a bank that is fully licensed and have a big reputation to uphold. Okay, I'm gonna take another quick pause because I see some questions in the chat box. Feel free to raise your hand as well to unmute. Okay, so Daniel already asked about the wallet. One Faris asks, what's the difference between proof of work and proof of stake? There's a lot of difference here. And I don't know if I can answer without like taking up too much time from the topic. But okay, a quick answer would be proof of work is where you need to create, you need to have these computing devices called miners to do the verification. Whereas when it comes to proof of stake, you have to stake a certain amount of that particular cryptocurrency to do the verification. Yeah, that's not a very good answer, but I think that's the answer I can give right now. If there's time, we can delve into this at the very end, if we still have time. Okay, we have more questions. Andrew asks, what's the difference between exchanges like Binance and DEXs like Uniswap? I will explain that a little bit later, so hold on a little bit. Justin asks, the wallets are not governed by passwords, but a set of specified keys in the correct sequence. Yes, so a wallet is secured essentially by the private key. You don't get to choose your private key. It's created when you create with the wallet. Yeah, so it's well, not governed, like it's secured by that private key. Generally, when people use a Web3 wallet or a hardware wallet, there is another layer on top where you put in like your PIN number or password. So in that sense, there is a password to access the wallet. But in actual fact, like if you look at the bare details, then it's only the private key. There's no password or PIN. And as I mentioned earlier, if you have the private key to a wallet, then from the blockchain point of view, you own that wallet. It doesn't matter what the legal system or what your bank says. As long as someone has a private key to a wallet, but for all intents and purposes, they own that wallet. And which is why, because exchanges will hold a private key to their wallets. So even though they tell you that that crypto belongs to you, it's actually just their word that you have to trust. From the blockchain point of view, the crypto belongs to their wallet that they hold the private keys to. Right, you're welcome, Justin. Okay, so moving on, let me just check my time. Okay, we're gonna take a little bit, gonna be a little bit over time, so apologies for that, people, if you need to rush off. There's going to be a recording as well, so you can check this later. Moving on to blockchain 2.0 and what difference this makes. So if blockchain 1.0 was about decentralized money, blockchain 2.0 is about this thing called a smart contract. And this is also another jargony kind of word, but you can think of it very simply as imagine a vending machine where someone from 100 years ago, when they see this vending machine, they might be like, this is magic, right? Because like there's no human being that is making any decisions. When you give it $5, the machine knows somehow that it's supposed to give you back $3. And if you press Coke, it will give you a can of Coca-Cola. Like there's no human being, there's no, it's magical because this machine somehow knows what to give you. But if any of us here have done any basic programming or have even used something like Microsoft Excel, we know that there are these things called an if function or conditional statements. And all the vending machine is doing is that it's checking if the user enters $5, then give them back $3. And if they choose Coca-Cola, then drop one can from the Coca-Cola shelf inside the machine. It's actually pretty straightforward once you understand it. And another like commonly hyped buzzword other than blockchain that people like to talk about is this Internet of Things. And a common example given is of this smart refrigerator, where if you have eggs in the fridge and it's running out because you've been using it, then the smart fridge knows that, okay, the eggs are running out. They will automatically make a transaction to an online grocery store to have eggs delivered to your house. And all it's doing is it has a sensor that checks whether the egg holder is now becoming empty. And once it reaches a certain threshold, then it will make an order to the grocery store. But the smart fridge and the vending machine both are relying on the centralized financial system that we're used to. So there still needs to be a bank that everybody trusts to execute the transaction for you. So the smart contract basically just combines this idea of the decentralized money, where you don't have to trust any central party, as well as the if-then function or conditional statements to create what's called a smart contract. So Bitcoin is limited and done on purpose. The script or the code that runs Bitcoin cannot do a lot of functions, cannot be very programmable. So let's say if you had an employee and it's the end of the month and you want to pay them their salary, it's hard. For the purposes of this example, we'll just say it cannot be done, although it can be. On Bitcoin, it's hard to be able to program this so that the salary is paid automatically. You actually have to go to your computer, type in the instruction to send the salary to your employee, which adds a bit of time, a bit of work for you, right? Whereas on something like Ethereum, you can code it such that if it's the end of the month and this person is still my employee, they haven't done anything that is blacklisting them from getting any pay, then I will use my smart contract to automatically pay them their salary. Like, I don't have to go to my computer and type the instructions to pay. So commonly, one way to look at this is to see the shift between our old mobile phones and to the smartphone when the iPhone got created. So with the old mobile phones, any applications on there, like some snake game or some simple camera, has to be created by the company themselves. So if you're Sony Ericsson, you have to create those apps yourself. Whereas with the iPhone, with the App Store, Apple doesn't have to create the apps themselves. They open it up for any app developers in the world to create a game or some other app, and they can leverage on the App Store to build all kinds of apps. So when you are unlocking this kind of capability to program many different things, that shift is similar from a non-smart contract blockchain to a blockchain with smart contracts, as if from an old mobile phone to a smartphone. And another example also is, if you can think of a calculator, which essentially is a computer because you can compute certain calculations. It's very good at what it does, but it's very restricted. You can't use your calculator to play a video or play some game. Whereas a laptop, you can use it for a lot of other things as well. So that's commonly what's described as the difference between a smart contract and a blockchain without a smart contract. For Malaysians, one example I like to give is this idea of a blockchain election, where in an election in Malaysia, up until a few years ago, we were always complaining that some blackout is happening. I don't know if my vote for the blue party has been changed to the red party or otherwise, because someone else might be like changing my vote behind the scenes. Even if this was done online, I don't know if like the website admin somehow is changing my vote without me realizing it after I've casted my vote on the user interface of the website. But if there was a blockchain with smart contracts, then when I'm casting my vote, the system can check that, okay, first, Harith is registered to vote. he is above 21, he is in this particular constituency, and very importantly, Harith has not voted yet in this election. And only when these conditions are met, then my vote is accepted and entered into the system. And then if I want to go back home and double check that my vote hasn't been tampered, I can check the block explorer and I can see that, okay, my vote for the blue party is still with the blue party. It hasn't been changed to the red one. So I can be confident that the election has been done in a way that is transparent. And that's just one theoretical use case. I'll be very upfront that right now, the technology hasn't really evolved yet because there's a lot of other considerations when it comes to elections. So if you ever hear about blockchain elections, take it with a pinch of salt. As far as I know, there hasn't been one full-fledged use case for this yet. But it's just to give you an example. And there are many, many, many things that you can use smart contracts for. I'm just going to run through some of them because otherwise we're going to take way more than the time that we have. But some ones that we've already seen are, for example, the ICO or initial coin offering. The peak was in 2017, 2018. A lot of people made a lot of money. A lot of people also lost a lot of money. I'm not going to talk about how you can make money from this thing. And I'm going to be upfront that probably 99% that were created were scams. And out of those, probably 99% of them have or will probably fail. But what I want to talk about is the use case it's unlocked. Because imagine that you wanted to invest in Google or Alibaba when they first started out. Unless you were a very rich and well-connected person or venture capital fund in Silicon Valley or Shanghai, it would be very difficult for you to be able to buy stock in these two companies. You can only do it until much, much later when they're doing their IPO. And by that time, the value has already gone up by 100 or 1,000 X. With ICOs, you can kind of invest in a team or a project that potentially can be the Google of the next century. And you can do that without having to be very well connected or extremely rich. You can do that with even like a few dollars worth of investment. And on the flip side, if you had this idea to become the next Google of the world, you had this crazy idea that can change the world. Before this, you would have to also be well connected and give up a lot of your equity to these venture capital funds to be able to get capital for your business at a valuation that may not be what you think it's worth. But with ICOs, you don't need to have these strong connections. You just need to create the code, publish it online, post it on Reddit or Twitter, and you theoretically have millions of people who can invest in your business from the get-go without having to go through the whole VC fund route. And I'm not saying this from a theoretical example. Like this was, like I said, 2018, like 3 years ago. I have actual experience from using this technology to participate in ICOs or token sales. And I also participated in what's called equity crowdfunding, which is a completely licensed in Malaysia. And the experience is completely different, where with ICOs, I can send my Ethereum and get the token that I'm buying within minutes or seconds. With the equity crowdfunding, I had to transfer to a Maybank account online. And in my case, they actually told me 1 day later that by the time I transferred, it was too late because they already maxed out their allocation and they would refund me. And I had to wait and wait and wait. And only a month later did they actually give back my refund to my bank account. And if it wasn't because this particular platform was licensed by the Malaysian regulators, I would have been very concerned that they had run away with my money. And it's not because they are doing it out of any bad faith, but it's just because they are using this centralized infrastructure where they need human beings or people in finance teams to verify that this transaction was properly done and this is the amount that can be transacted or refunded. So the difference is between the if-then function and the human being that is checking it based on their own 9 to 5 hours. So just to show some numbers, these are some projects even now in 2020 and 2021 have raised a lot of money for their projects using this ICO function. Another example is what's called a DAO, or a decentralized autonomous organization. The analogy that I like to give is, imagine Uber or Grab in our case, and how they have been experimenting with these driverless cars. And the idea of driverless cars is that, you know, you enter a car, there's no driver there, you just pay using your app, and the car knows where to drive you to and drop you off. The DAO extends this idea to, what if it wasn't just a driverless car, but also a humanless company where, you know, there's no employees, there's no finance, there's no HR. All of these functions are done via smart contracts, via pieces of code, so that you enter the driverless car and you pay using your app. The money directly goes to the smart contract instead of some finance team that's checking it. Using the smart contract, it gets used to pay for, let's say, the car's maintenance. And the car itself knows that after 6 months or 10,000 kilometers, as tracked by its sensor, it needs to automatically drive itself to a partnering maintenance workshop, and then pay automatically from its smart contract address. So this is very fantastical, probably not going to happen in the next 10 years, but it is possible to imagine this with smart contracts being around. There are already DAOs that have been created, a lot of them with financial use cases, not so much something like transportation, and they've raised billions of dollars, and they're actually transacting billions of dollars using these DAOs. There's no company that's backing them. It's just a bunch of smart contracts and an online community of users. There's a whole industry called DeFi, or Decentralized Finance, and basically anything that you can see in the real world when it comes to finance, it has already been replicated in the blockchain space, whether it's insurance, lending, derivatives, funding, payments. All of this has already been done. It's still in nascent stages, but there are currently billions of dollars that are being transacted from people in, let's say, Venezuela to people in Korea, and done without any kind of banks, without any like financial institutions that is trusted between these people. I like to tell my friends who are in the traditional finance world that they probably, within the next 5 to 10 years, their jobs might get completely disrupted, because there already exist platforms that can give people loans without having to go through a bank. And not just that, the normal user like you and me can also become the lender. Like, we now don't just need to participate as a customer that is only borrowing from the bank. We can be the bank ourselves by using these platforms. We can be the lender, we can be the capital provider for insurance, we can be the capital provider for an exchange market maker, and we can earn fees from it, from lending, from market making, all of this stuff. we can already earn fees. And a lot of us in the crypto space are already earning fees that typically are earned by the banks in the real world. So yeah, this is something that's probably going to completely disrupt finance in the next 5 to 10 years. And yeah, if you're in that space and you're not keeping tabs on this, then you might be in for a rude surprise in a couple of years' time. So to answer one of the questions earlier, so one subset of DeFi is what's called a decentralized exchange. If you remember what I mentioned earlier about exchanges, that you have to trust them to hold your money for you. A decentralized exchange is one where it's completely run by smart contracts. You never have to trust your crypto, or let's say your Ethereum, to any human being or any company. It's always in your own wallet, and there is a smart contract that you give access to, and only when a condition is met, then it will take, let's say, my 1 Ether from my wallet, move it to someone else's wallet, and then take someone else's token, let's say uni, let's say it's 10 uni, and automatically transfer that to my wallet. Because it's done via smart contract, which is open source, that you never have to worry that someone is like somehow changing the code. It's already published online and cannot be changed. Then you never have to worry that, you know, the money that you are looking to exchange can be somehow hijacked or hacked away from you, or stolen from you. So decentralized exchanges are extremely powerful. Uniswap's only existed for about a year plus, and they are currently already having volumes that competes with the largest centralized exchanges in the world. And like, to be very detailed, specific, Uniswap, the example that I'm showing here, is itself not just any kind of DEX or decentralized exchange. It's what's called an automated market maker. So I mentioned earlier, like, I am actually making money right now from doing this thing because I'm providing the capital for the platform to automatically market make. And market make just means basically buying and selling to match people's orders and make the exchange a lot more liquid or a lot more competitive. So this is already done. Uniswap is probably the best example to give of a completely decentralized sort of financial service that you never have to trust any company or entity to run it for you. Oh, and one thing with Uniswap, one very good example I like to give is that, so the Uniswap team is based in the US. They've created the Uniswap smart contracts and they have a Uniswap website. So the US government actually told them to block any transactions done by Iranians because the US doesn't like Iran. And so the team, they blocked Iran IPs or basically Iran computers from connecting to their website because they had to comply by their government. But the smart contract itself, the team has no control over. The smart contract exists on the blockchain, and the team cannot stop anyone from using that smart contract. And what's happened is that the community around the world then created their own mirrors of Uniswap website. Like, if you've ever done any torrents, you'll know how this works. Like, you have your Pirate Bay that exists in multiple different domains. So a lot of people created these mirror copies of Uniswap, and with their copies, they never block Iranians from using. So the Iranians can go to this other website and use Uniswap just like everybody else. So even if the team itself wanted to block people, they cannot do it. And that's just an example of how you can have a decentralized financial infrastructure that cannot be censored or blocked by any company or government. I'm just going to make sure I don't take too much time. I'm going to probably skip a couple of stuff here. But so another part of DeFi is what's called algorithmic stablecoins. So a very popular one is called DAI. It's a stablecoin that, so basically it's pegged to the US dollar. And while other stablecoins, you have to trust that the company is holding the US dollar somewhere. In this case, there is no trust in a company involved, because for you to be able to create a DAI stablecoin, you have to over collateralize. You have to have, let's say, Ethereum, lock it in a smart contract somewhere, and then let's say 100% of your Ethereum is locked, and you can only mint 50% of that Ethereum's value into DAI, and then you can spend it around. The analogy is actually very similar to pajak gadai or pawnbroking. So if you have a gold bar or your grandma's gold necklace, you can go bring it to the pawnbroker and leave it in their hands, and in exchange they'll give you a loan of money. And the loan collateral is always over collateralized. So if your gold is worth $200, you can only get loan of, let's say, $100. So that if you run away and never pay back your loan, the pawnbroker just takes your gold necklace and sells it off somewhere else. So the idea is very similar. With this DAI stablecoin, you are locking away your Ethereum collateral, and if the value of Ethereum drops below a certain threshold, then the platform will automatically liquidate your collateral, so that you can never get access to your Ethereum back anymore. It's already sold to the market. I'm going to skip yield farming and liquidity. If anyone's interested, I can answer this right at the very end, so that the people who have to leave can leave first. Yeah, this one skip as well. There are many other use cases, not just in DeFi. So for example, you can buy a domain where if a wallet is a completely randomized string, you can buy an address name like harith.eth using a smart contract, and you can use this as a form of reputation, as a form of identity in the blockchain space. There's also online advertising. So one project called Brave, if you've heard of them, they have a browser called a Brave browser, which works almost like Chrome. And in this case, if you see ads on their browser, they actually pay you their cryptocurrency or token called the BAT. So this is actually from my own use. I get BAT from using their browser and being shown ads. There are what's called non-fungible tokens, which is actually very hot right now, where people can create digital art that is can be proven in its authenticity. So let's say your famous artist, let's say Banksy, can create a piece of art that in digital format anyone can copy and paste, but you can use the blockchain to show that this piece that you just bought from Banksy is the actual original piece based on the blockchain. So you can have that kind of bragging rights that a physical piece of art gives you. So that's just one example. There are many other use cases of NFTs or non-fungible tokens. Yeah, another case, there were actually people in the Philippines who survived using an NFT game as an income. So they played the game using some NFTs, and they actually got rewarded with tokens for playing it, and they actually lived off of that in the difficult COVID times. There's also community currencies. There's one in Kenya. It's kind of a charity project run by this project called Grassroots Economics. You can Google them. They run this Sarafu coin, Sarafu network, where people in Kenya use this community currency that's backed by a blockchain so that they can multiply the impact of any donations given. Separately, there's also Reddit, which is one of the largest social media platforms in the world. They have created their own community currencies that people can use and buy. Right now, only 2 subreddits, the /cryptocurrency and r/Fortnite, have their own community currencies. They have personal tokens where people can raise money from others and pay them back as a bond with an extra rate of return. So the idea is this actually has already been done by an NBA player. He got people to give him money and he pays them back as from his future salary, as and when the salary comes in. And he also creates a relationship between him and his backers or finance. I can also be applied for people who are applying to go to, let's say, expensive university, and in the future pay off these funders from their future salary, what's called an income share agreement. There's parametric insurance. I'll skip this unless people ask me later. But basically automatically insurance that pays off automatically without any claims having to be submitted. There's microcredit, where like livestock like cows can be used as collateral because it's tracked by a combination of NFC technology and blockchain and other technologies, so that farmers who typically don't have access to credit from banks can use their livestock as collateral to get credit. Yeah, then there's also some kind of fancy economical stuff. I can explain this also later. And so the idea of Ethereum is that it is decentralized applications, where if you have an application on the App Store on iPhone, you still need to rely on the Apple company not to censor you or block you. In Ethereum, you can create any app and no one in the world can stop you from building it or from using it. It's also programmable money because you can do a lot more things with your money automatically compared to something like Bitcoin. And I like to say it's also unstoppable applications. Like with the Uniswap example, even the US government, which is the most powerful government in the world, cannot stop an Iranian from using Uniswap because of how it's done on the Ethereum blockchain. Okay, before I move on, let me see if there's any more questions. Johan asks if failed ICOs have an obligation to refund the money raised. So this is an interesting question. From the blockchain point of view, because the blockchain doesn't care. Like I said, it just cares about who owns the private key to which wallet. So as long as you hold the private key to a wallet that holds a specific token, then you own it. There's no argument of refunds or whether someone is being scammed or whatever. In the real world, there is there's laws to be followed. And so this is why the ICO market bubbled in 2017-18, but then crashed because the regulators, securities regulators came in and stepped in and said that these are not allowed. And so even if whatever you want to do on the blockchain, you still exist in the real world, I can still find you and fine you or imprison you. So you see a lot of people have stopped from doing this, which is actually a good thing because the people who are doing this now are making sure that they follow whatever regulations that exist. But yeah, the obligation to refund is on the legal side of things between human beings, not on the blockchain side of things between smart contract or wallet addresses. So someone's asking me, okay, just thanking. Okay, so you're welcome. Murshid is asking, earning in DeFi, staking, farming, is it Sharia compliant? As I assume it is interest based. That depends. I think I'll mention Sharia. Actually, I'll just mention it now. I don't have an actual slide for it, but since we're talking to INCEIF sort of audience, in Sharia, and I'm sure INCEIF people can corroborate me here, it's actually very simple. Everything is halal, everything is allowed, unless there is evidence against it. So there's this maslahah, there's this idea of everything is allowed until there is evidence that it's doing something that is not allowed. So blockchains or cryptocurrencies are generally allowed unless they are doing things that are wrong in Islam. So for example, if if the crypto token is backed by, let's say, harmful drugs or pornography, then it is harmful. Then it is illegal. When it comes to cryptocurrency, then the Sharia also has a law on currency, and if something is to be used as currency, then you have to apply these things called the Ribawi rules, where to simplify it, generally, if it's trading like for like, then it has to be of the same value, and it has to be done at spot, which means at a lot of scholars have said at T+0, where you cannot have like a pay someone now and get the item 2 days later. It has to be done immediately at spot. Then if you talk about DeFi and the various things under DeFi, it depends on what the platform actually is. So if it's a lending platform where the return comes from interest, then majority of scholars will say interest clearly is wrong. So you cannot profit from interest in a halal way. Very small minority, I think, will say that there's a difference between interest and usury, but I'm not going to delve into that. If, for example, the fee that the earnings that you're getting is by market making, so you are providing capital to an exchange, and whenever people are making a buy or sell order, you are just providing the capital so that the platform can match their buy and sell orders. In that case, I'm no scholar, but I will say that that is completely halal, because you are providing a service and you're actually risking your capital, because there is a thing called impermanent loss, which is an advanced topic I'll mention some other time. But there is a risk that you're facing with doing that. And also that you're providing service. So that should be a halal or Sharia compliant way of making money. So there's just some examples. The short of it is, it depends on the underlying asset or the underlying mechanism, whether that mechanism or asset is itself Sharia compliant. And I will say that I don't think a lot of Islamic scholars at all are familiar with crypto, much less DeFi. So it's very difficult to get an answer from them, because whatever answer they give may well be an ignorant answer in the sense of the technology. So it's my hope that there are more of them that understand this technology better, and I'm more than happy to share with them, if you know any of them, that we can come to a answer that is as close to a knowledgeable answer as possible. Okay, then Yasir is asking, scarcity is important to retain value. What makes blockchain scarce in general? So generally speaking, it's not necessarily scarce. Like, you could create your own blockchain today, and you can have that supply function. What I mentioned earlier inside the mining topic, where Satoshi created this a block reward that gets rewarded to every new to a miner whenever a new block gets mined. So theoretically, you could also create a blockchain, and the reward that you give to each new block is extremely high. So just because something is a blockchain doesn't mean that it has necessarily a scarce supply or scarcer than your fiat money. In Bitcoin's case, it's actually been coded in from the start that the total supply will only ever be 21 million. And every 4 years, there is a halving that happens, where if, let's say, currently one block gets 10 Bitcoin. I can't remember the exact number, but let's just say it's 10 Bitcoin. 4 years later, automatically by the code that is already published, is already open source, the code will automatically cut that reward from 10 to 5. So it's halving the new supply of Bitcoin, or the rate of new supply of Bitcoin. So as long as the community as a whole agrees that the Bitcoin code that we will run is only this code. Like, if anyone else out there wants to add a new line in the Bitcoin code that says the supply is now not halved every 4 years, even if someone was to create that code, they now have to convince all the thousands of computers around the world that are nodes to the Bitcoin system to run his version of the code instead of the current canonical version. So yeah, it's like the Quran trying to hijack the Quran with a verse like, unless I can convince everyone else to accept my version of the code, no one will use my version. So the supply will always be what the current version of Bitcoin is saying. There's a more advanced topic here where 21 million might not be feasible from a security point of view, but I'm not going to delve into that. But the idea is that the code is already published, it's already open source. So unless everyone within this community agrees to run a completely different set of code, then it will always run that way. And if that code already bakes in itself a scarcity element of a limited supply, then it will by nature be scarce in supply. So I don't know if that answers the question exactly, but I hope it helps. There are other blockchains out there, for example, Ethereum, that doesn't have a fixed limited supply, and their approach is minimum viable issuance, where the inflation theoretically could still be changed. The community has never made a social contract with each other to fix it at a particular number, but the social contract is to agree to have this supply be whatever is necessary to ensure that the blockchain is secure. So Yasir is asking, how can we access the code? I think you can just Google Bitcoin Core repo or GitHub. You'll be able to find it. Basically, any client that runs Bitcoin, like if you wanted to run a Bitcoin client or node on your computer, it will be running that code. Like if you download that client, the website that has the client somewhere will show the code that is running Bitcoin, because it's the exact same code. Okay, there's a new question here. Lawrence is asking, let's say you create a real life business with dApp where customer can exchange product. How to hide how much each of the customer have as it is in Etherscan? So that's a good point. In the real world, we might not want people to see everything. We might not want to have full transparency. And this is a standing kind of topic. There's no real fixed answer here. It's up to you, essentially. So for example, I used to work at Hello Gold, and Hello Gold was creating this permissioned blockchain, where the idea is it's not a fully open blockchain that anyone in the world can see. It's a blockchain that has a limited number of participants who can see the details. So for example, it's people like Bank Negara, like corporate partners. And the idea is that Hello Gold can show the gold balances to this closed group of participants, so that they can verify that Hello Gold isn't like adding a new kilogram of gold here or double spending some amount there, so that these corporates or these regulators can double check, but the outside world, the average person, cannot see those details like you're mentioning with the block explorer like Etherscan. So if some makcik somewhere suddenly gets 10,000 ringgit or 100,000 ringgit bequeathed to them, there's no risk that their neighbor can check her address and find out, because that layer is abstracted away from the public. So that's one solution, generally called using a permission blockchain. There are other solutions that's being worked on as well. One is creating a privacy layer, so people can't see which address has what, at least in an easy way, or creating like mixes in a specific blockchain, or a mixer application. But yeah, those are some ideas, and there's no real like right or wrong answer at this point. Yeah, I hope that helps. So okay, I think we're way past 1.5 hours already. I'm just going to very quickly run through the last couple of sections. So some local companies and communities. So Etherscan that I work at is a block explorer, like I mentioned, for the Ethereum blockchain. We're the largest explorer in the world. So I'm saying this now, but I would say this even if I wasn't working for Etherscan, and for a long time I was not. It's a really cool thing where some small company in Malaysia that nobody's heard of is the leading service in the entire world with millions of users. And similarly, CoinGecko also does the same thing. So it's a what's generally called a cryptocurrency data aggregator. So the equivalent would be if you look at your Bursa Malaysia stocks, if you have a website that shows all of the tickers, all of the stock tickers with their prices and volumes and other data, CoinGecko does that for cryptocurrencies. I think they track something like 6,000 plus cryptocurrencies around the world. And they are also used by millions of people around the world. Another example is Hello Gold. I mentioned a couple of things like the permission blockchain that I mentioned just now. And you also did a token sale. A company called Neuroware worked with Securities Commission Malaysia to create a POC, a proof of concept of a blockchain network for our local kind of stock broking system, where currently there's a lot of third-party individuals or entities, and they were trying to decentralize all of that, where you don't have to rely on the entities. But that was done a couple of years ago. I don't think there's been any news on that front for a while now. Blockline, headed by our current president of Access Malaysia. It's generally an education company. They've done a lot of hackathons, a lot of workshops for students and people to learn how to program smart contracts and things like that. There's also Luxtag, which is a company that does provenance. So in short, something like if you have a Gucci bag and you want to prove that you have the real Gucci bag and not some China ripoff, then the company can provide some sort of evidence on the blockchain, and that's what Luxtag shows. And then on the community side, so there's Ethereum Malaysia, which I run. As I mentioned, we focus on the technical and use cases of blockchains, primarily Ethereum, but also others. We meet once a month on the first Thursday of the month. I also, as part of that, I also run things like this Blockchain 101 workshop. If there are any developers here, we're doing a smart contract workshop actually this Sunday. Yeah, so you can sign up to our meetup group and get informed of any events that we're running, mostly around Ethereum and mostly around the technology itself. There's also a Bitcoin Malaysia Facebook group that has more than 55,000 members. And I think this is the largest single group that Malaysia has in crypto. This one, it's open, so a lot of people share memes, share trading talk and stuff like that. And there's a lot of them. So yeah, you can share and meet other crypto people or traders. There's also a G1 group, which is a highly curated group that has some of the biggest whales in Malaysia, the people who hold the most cryptocurrencies. There's Access Malaysia, which is an organization that's representing the local crypto space, talking to banks, talking to regulators, to make sure that we are well represented. Asia Blockchain Review has worked with some local universities, and they run like a Asia magazine on crypto. Blockchain Embassy Asia, I think, hasn't been very active. The people behind them are also behind Neuroware. They used to have members. I guess if they're active, then they do still have members, including corporates like Maybank and some other corporations to explore use cases of blockchains. Yeah, so those are local companies and communities. A note on culture, and this is not just local, but as you go along in crypto, you will find this cropping up in various circumstances, and it's very like political. Things tend to become very political in this space. So I just want to give you a note because I learned this from many years slowly. Generally, these are things to kind of like you can use to filter what you hear from someone else. So the first thing are that there are shills. So these are people who are shilling their own coin. Like, let's say they have Bitcoin, they will obviously say Bitcoin is the best thing in the world. All these other cryptocurrencies out there are scams or useless, or they are shilling their own scam coin somewhere. So and whenever someone tells you that, you know, this coin is the best, you want to filter, you want to understand whether it's because they hold that coin and it's in their incentive to say that that coin is the best. Their bags, short for bag holding, is the best, because if more people buy their coin, their value goes up. And if people buy some other coin that's not theirs, then that's like opportunity cost that's lost from those same people buying their coin. And this is prevalent everywhere, and it's almost a natural bias. I think I might have it sometimes as well, although I try to remind myself not to do this. But yeah, it's a natural thing with humans when the incentives are in a particular direction. And then the second and third is very related, and this is a very fundamental part of crypto or blockchain, where there is one camp that is saying that the blockchain can only be used for a very strict, narrow use case. So these are generally the Bitcoiners, the Bitcoin maximalists even, who will say every other cryptocurrency blockchain out there are useless or scams, because blockchains can only be used for decentralized money. You cannot use it for all the smart contract stuff. You cannot use it for games, for identity, because the blockchain cannot scale to handle that in a way that still retains its decentralized trait. Like if it scales to cover all of that stuff, then it will have to make some trade-offs, and therefore it will become again centralized or censorable. So these people will say that only hard money that doesn't inflate itself, is the only use case for blockchains. And then on the extreme end of the scale, the other end are the very experimental people, the ones who are like saying, oh, you can use blockchain for everything, blockchain for music, for media, for games, for reputation. So these people are saying that, oh, why is restricted to just money? You can use it for anything in the world. And the answer, as often is the case, probably lies somewhere in the middle. No one can say at this point in a factual manner which camp is right, or which kind of like part of the scale, which point on the scale is the right way. We can probably find out maybe in like 20 years time. And the way to look at it is, if you imagine a triangle, it's a very simple shape, and it's very limited in its surface area. So if you purposely keep things very simple, so for example, Bitcoin always tries to keep itself very simple, not to add all this smart contract kind of functionality and stuff like that. Because if it's simple, then there's less space for you to monitor, where in the long string of code, if it's shorter, it's easier for you to check that there's no gaps or vulnerabilities for hackers to get in. Whereas if something is extremely experimental with all kinds of smart contracts that rely on each other, then the shape becomes very complicated. I can't remember the name of this shape here, but like it has a lot of a lot of different angles, and the surface area is extremely large compared to a simple triangle, where there might be some part somewhere that has a vulnerability that you're not aware of, and hackers can find their way in and abuse your platform or your system. And we've actually seen a lot of this in the past year. Like right now, you probably see every other week you'll hear like some millions of dollars lost due to some hacking of some DeFi smart contract, and that is partially explained by how these things are a lot more complex, and when things are more complex, the surface area for attack is also higher. Okay, so this is a note on community and culture, and lastly is the so what. So why should any of this matter to you? First thing is that it's very much a defining technology for our time. People like to say that it's like the internet in the mid-90s. People used to say that the internet might not amount to anything more than just a fax machine. And now we see that it powers pretty much everything in life, from social media to e-commerce and so on. So similarly with blockchain, we might be at just the start of what is even possible with the blockchain. There might be more and more things out there that we haven't even imagined can be done. But on the flip side, it might also be the case that this early technology doesn't live up to its potential, that maybe there is some blocker that exists out there that, let's say, it cannot scale above a certain amount. It cannot be like the Visa that has thousands of transactions a second. And so then its use becomes a lot less meaningful. Nobody knows this for sure. We probably only find this out down the road. Because of this, it's also extremely high risk investment. Although with high risk also comes high reward. I like to say it's as if you were to buy a Google stock in the mid-90s or before the dot-com bubble. And you know, today you might have like you might be 1,000 times richer for buying that Google stock. But whatever that you buy now may not be the Google. It may be the Yahoo or the I don't know, a Netscape of that time, where maybe your multiple might not be as high as Google, and you might even have a loss because it might be a company that didn't make it past the dot-com bubble. So whatever crypto you buy now might not make it past the current bubble that we're in. So it's high risk and high reward. Generally, the advice is never risk any more money than you can afford to lose, and never, ever, ever, even if you're not Muslim, take leverage because that is a recipe for disaster. You might strike lucky, but if you're not lucky, you may well go into a very painful debt, basically. Also importantly, a lot of people here, whether you're in university or you're working, understand the impact that this technology has to your career. If there is anything that your industry can be impacted by having trust minimized transactions between entities, then your industry might well be impacted. So I already mentioned finance, and currently it's actively being disrupted by hundreds of projects around the world. And beyond that, my call to action for you guys is to help the open source community grow. The internet back in the 90s, people were saying it might become this fractured world where everything is behind a walled garden of like AOL will have their own internet and Yahoo will have their own internet and so on. And it was only from the efforts of thousands of people or maybe even millions of people around the world to fight for a decentralized internet that everybody can have the same access to websites as everybody else that has resulted in the internet that we have today. We can actually even already see that the internet is becoming more centralized. So for example, Facebook is like trying to control more of the internet under their hands. Same with Amazon, Google. A bunch of these companies are becoming, too big to fail, and that's something that people in the blockchain space want to fight against. That we want the blockchain space to be open, decentralized, open source, and not controlled by people like Facebook, who are already trying to do so, and other large corporations or entities. So my call to action for you guys is join Ethereum Malaysia, the meetup group that I run. We take everyone in, no matter your level of expertise, no matter your background. We think we can all contribute to not just support blockchain as a community, but also support the local Malaysian space, for those of you who are Malaysians at least, because we want to show that Malaysians also can do meaningful services or provide value. It's not just Etherscan and CoinGecko, that there can be a lot more value that can be provided by us Malaysians to the entire world. And it's not just Malaysians kind of brain draining out of the country. So yeah, how we can do that? I have a bunch of different ideas. Let's say you're a student, you can come in and we can work on open source projects that is not making any revenue, at least at first. Regardless of your background, you can contribute. And from that, it would also actually help your own CV and portfolio. You can add it to your own GitHub account or your LinkedIn accounts. And I can tell you, as someone who is actively working in the space, most companies don't care about your CV, don't care about you having a degree or master's or whatever. They care about your actual experience in the space and being able to show that you've done a project with other people and actually that project adds value to the world is the best way to get picked up by these kinds of companies. A lot of them hire remotely and pay in US dollars. If you want to turn these projects then into your own company, the community can also help you there. We can be something like an incubator. We have connections to a lot of the people in the space, whether locally or internationally, who could potentially be investors to you or connect you with partners that can help. We even have one of our community members who runs Crypto Jobs List, which is one of the biggest websites for crypto jobs around the world. And you can use that website to apply for jobs. So that's what you get from like participating with the local community. Just to shill my own company and also CoinGecko, I like to say these are two of the best companies in Malaysia if you want to be involved in the blockchain space. So it's also value add to the listeners. But yeah, there are all kinds of jobs that are out there, not just technical programming jobs, but also others. So if you're interested, you can take a screenshot of this slide. For the Etherscan one, you can connect with me, reach out to me. My handle is HarithK17, both on Twitter and Telegram. Yeah, so feel free to reach out to me for more. For CoinGecko, you can go to their website here, coingecko.com/en/careers and apply for these jobs directly. Yeah. Okay. Then to review before I end, so we covered the preamble, sort of common words that are used, concepts like money and decentralization. We covered some features of blockchain 1.0 and some features and use cases of blockchain 2.0. Local companies and communities, and the so what. And if you can't remember anything else from this talk, I would kind of just ask that you remember just these three things: that blockchains are not anonymous, that you are your own security, and that exchanges are not wallets. If you can't remember anything else, remember these things because they are extremely important for you not to lose your crypto or things like that. So this is just a very, very brief 101 talk, although we're over time. There are a lot more things that we can cover. So usually what I can also do is a hands-on workshop for you to set up your own blockchain wallet and try out some of these decentralized applications. There are also use cases to explore, such as the ones I mentioned on the left. And there are many, many other concepts to understand. A lot of them I am probably not the best person to explain as well, because they are a lot more advanced. But yeah, so this is just the start of your journey down the rabbit hole. The hole goes deeper and deeper, almost endlessly. Yeah, so finally, last slide. If you have any feedback on today's talk, feel free to scan the QR code on the left or type in the URL. You will be sent to a Google form. You can just give your feedback. I appreciate all feedback, brutal honesty, much appreciated. And if you'd like to support me a little bit for giving this talk, you can sign up for Luno and use this referral code. If you buy, I think 250 ringgit worth of Bitcoin, then we both get 25 ringgit. Yeah, so that's just a minor thing. But otherwise, that's pretty much it. I think I'm quite a bit over time. But yeah, it's a very big topic and it's very difficult to compress them into a few short minutes. So yeah, if you have any final questions, I'm just going to go to the chat box now. Actually, there's quite a number of questions. Let me see.
Is there any social media platform or email that you can share for them to, keep engaging with you and for the questions to?
Sure. I mean, outside of this talk, I probably should have a slide for this, but you can refer to this thing here on the bottom left. You can go on Twitter or Telegram, search for at HarithK17, and you'll find me there. And then just feel free to drop me any kind of message. Just to make sure I don't miss out any questions. Johan here asked, does Etherscan have open source projects that people can work on in spare time? You can reach out to me, Johan, DM me, and then depending on your like skill set or what you can do, there might be things that you can work on a part-time basis. Ali says, thank you, welcome. Lauren says, does company created by DAO be publicly listed? That's a good question that I don't think anyone has any answer at this point. It will probably depend on the regulatory conditions, on the regulators in the specific jurisdiction for the IPO, because the regulators, I mean, they are in charge, right? So for them to be in charge, there has to be an entity that they can take action on. And if there is no such entity, then I'm pretty sure the regulators will not allow for an IPO to be done. If you're thinking of IPO in the sense of in the local stock market and so on. But if you're thinking of like a completely decentralized way of buying kind of shares or tokens that represent a project, then that's already being done right now. You can already buy things on decentralized exchanges like Uniswap to buy tokens that are part of a DAO. Justin says, MetaMask. Okay, I think you're referring to MetaMask. I'm not aware of a MetaMask wallet. But yeah, so buying a CryptoKitty, gas price is high. So actually that's true. And if we look through the second last slide here, so one major issue is scaling. So the Ethereum network right now is quite congested, or very much congested. So there are efforts at scaling the infrastructure, which hasn't been done yet. And so, yeah, so with all blockchains, that's still a standing question. And why I say it's a early technology that might not live up to its potential is if within the entire space, we can't somehow figure out a way to scale the current blockchains that we have, then we will run into these congestion issues and the gas prices will be high. And it's high because it's very congested. There are a lot of other people out there that are paying much more than your 1.6 Ether. And so unless you can like bid more than them, you can't get your transaction processed. FI, where do I work now? So as mentioned, I work at Etherscan. So it's a block explorer for Ethereum. Gas prices fluctuate, but they are generally high, some higher than item. Yes. Yeah, so that's related to the previous question. There's a lot of congestion. Like if I'm not talking from an Ethereum point of view, there are other blockchains you can use, but depending on what you want, like what token you want to access, there are other blockchains and they all make different trade-offs. I don't have time to go through each one, but there are other blockchains that are not as congested. For example, the Binance Smart Chain, Avalanche, Matic, XDAI, Phantom, Hiko. Yeah, so there are many different blockchains out there other than just Ethereum. And so these are not nearly as congested, and they also have smart contracts. And generally they have their own versions of the different DeFi platforms. So you can still use those if you want. Yeah, so FI mentions AOL. Lawrence asks if there's Trust Wallet MetaMask. So the question is, how is there a wallet that you can use to hide yourself from the public? So it's not a question of the wallet itself, because the wallet is, you can think of it as on the application layer. It's more a question of on the network layer or the blockchain layer. So so if you're using the Ethereum layer, the public permissionless Ethereum blockchain, then you can't hide, because even if some wallet somewhere hides it, someone else can just go to Etherscan, and Etherscan will show all of these details. So there's nothing you can hide. So there are privacy applications, for example, Tornado Cash, where they mix transactions, so you can't easily tell who sent something where. So these are on top of Ethereum, but it's a mixer, and you can Google what mixers are lah. So it's not by itself a private layer, and there are privacy blockchains, private blockchains, such as Monero, Zcash, Zcoin, where you can transact, and whatever wallet that people use cannot trace who sent what. But yeah, so that's a different blockchain. And generally, I think they don't have smart contracts as well. Do they also pay in crypto tokens? So FI, I imagine you're asking about CoinGecko and Etherscan. For Etherscan, I can say it's paid in ringgit, but there are bonuses that are given out. But generally, also it's converted to ringgit. That's just the way it is. But I will say that, you know, if you look at either Etherscan or CoinGecko, you probably have a front seat view on all the latest trends in the crypto space, and you can probably like use your own money to make investments that are better informed than a lot of other people out there. Host share recorded session. I believe we are recording it right now, and we will definitely share it from the Ethereum Malaysia YouTube channel. So if you sign up for the Ethereum Malaysia meetup group, we can show you there, and I probably should find that link and put it here. DAO on autonomous car achieve level 5. Sorry, Lawrence, I'm not sure what level 5 means, so I can't answer that for now. Justin asked, can I rewatch? Yes, so we will get the recording and put it on YouTube. Shamsuddin says, informative and fruitful. Thank you, you're welcome. Yeah, okay. So INCEIF will also have the recordings as well. Cool. I think we're quite a lot out of time. So thanks everyone for listening in. Again, I'm just going to put this here if you have any feedback or if you want to like buy Bitcoin on Luno. Yeah, so if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer one or two more. If not, thank you for taking the time to listen. And yeah, we will get the recording and share it out. Cool. Yeah, thanks. Back to you, Fadil.
Okay, so if there's no more questions, Alhamdulillah, thank you all for participating with us today. I believe we've gained so much input on blockchain today. We appreciate it, Sir Harith. Hope that we can meet up again soon in the next stage of this program. So dear participants, stay tuned on the announcements about this program on INCEIF website. And with that, sorry for any inconveniences and the extra time we took. Thank you again for joining us today. Assalamualaikum, and have a pleasant day ahead, inshallah.
Bye. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.